Hello everyone, I wish you peace and happiness. Are you all healthy? Today, I will continue to tell you about the difficult, scarce and challenging days of Huyen and her mother trying to make a living. Da was sitting slumped by the edge of the bed when suddenly he was startled by Huyen and Appo's heavy breathing. He quickly got up, saw her face pale, her lips bluish, and her chest heaving weakly as if she was about to die. End quote. Huyen, can you hear me? End quote. Da hurriedly ran over, shook her shoulder gently and kept calling her name, but Huyen still showed no response. Her eyes were closed tightly, and her breathing became more and more irregular, making him panic. Without thinking, Da ran out of the hospital room as fast as he could, shouting loudly, End quote, "Doctor! Help! The patient is having difficulty breathing. Doctor!" End quote. His desperate calls echoed throughout the hospital corridor. Immediately, the doctor and two nurses from the on-call room rushed into the room with an ambulance. The doctor quickly checked Huyen and Appo's pulse, blood pressure and blood oxygen levels. A nurse immediately put on an oxygen mask, while another prepared emergency medication and adjusted the four-line. End quote. Quick, increase the oxygen. Continuously monitor the pulse and blood pressure. Prepare emergency medication. End quote. The doctor decisively ordered. Da stood in the corner of the room, his hands trembling as he clenched them tightly. He could only watch the urgent actions of the medical team, constantly praying that Huyen would survive this critical moment. Micah also woke up from the noise, clutching Da and Appo's arm tightly, her eyes red as she looked at her mother being desperately treated by the doctors. Under the faint sunlight of the early morning filtering through the hospital window, the room remained quiet. Huyen still lay motionless on the hospital bed, her face pale. Micah was sleeping soundly beside her mother after a long, exhausting night. Right at the edge of the bed, Da sat on a small chair, his hands still resting on the bedrail as if holding Huyen and Appo's hand to watch over her. Overcome with exhaustion, he had bowed his head onto the edge of the bed and fallen asleep without realizing it. His face showed clear signs of fatigue after many sleepless nights caring for the two mother and child. Outside the corridor, the sound of nurses and Appo's footsteps began to echo, signaling a new day at the hospital. The morning sunlight gradually filled the room, but Huyen, Micah, and Da were still deep in sleep, as if trying to make up for the anxious hours of the previous night. Da gently opened his eyes after a restless sleep. He hurriedly stood up, bent down and softly called, Huyen, dear. He gently shook Huyen and Appo's shoulder, but she remained still, her eyes closed, with no reaction at all. Da reached out and placed his hand on her forehead, his face showing clear concern. Turning to the side, Micah was still sleeping soundly. Da gently carried the girl into his arms, trying not to wake her. He took Micah to the clinic and Appo's bathroom. Placing her in front of the sink, Da took a clean cloth, soaked it in warm water, and gently washed her face, hands and feet. The girl rubbed her eyes and then woke up, obediently allowing Da to care for her. I took a basin of warm water and carefully carried it back to the hospital room. I led Micah behind me, gently opening the door so as not to disturb the other patients. I placed the basin on the small table beside the bed, dipped a soft towel into the water, wrung it out lightly, and then turned to Huyen. Gently, I wiped each side of her cheeks, her forehead, and the corners of her eyes. Then I carefully wiped down her neck, both arms and her thin hands. I washed the towel clean, wrung it out, and pulled the blanket up just enough, gently wiping each foot and her legs. All movements were slow and careful. Huyen still had her eyes closed, her breathing steady, but she showed no reaction. Micah obediently sat close to the hospital bed. The little girl gently squeezed her mother and Appo's hands and feet with her tiny hands, just like she saw Da do. Occasionally Micah looked up at Huyen and Appo's face and softly called out, Mommy, wake up for me, But Huyen remained still, her eyes closed tightly, breathing steadily but still not awake. De looked at the mother and daughter, gently stroked Micah and Appo's head and softly said, and quote, "Be good, Micah. Stay here and watch over mom for back. Back will go out to buy some food and will come back right away, so Don and Appo's run anywhere." End quote. Micah nodded softly and quote, "Yes, I will stay here with mom." End quote. De quickly left the hospital room. He walked down the corridor, hurriedly leaving the hospital to buy some food. Outside the hospital gate, the small stalls had already started to attract more people. I stopped in front of a cart selling boiled corn, the warm steam rising with the fragrant smell of freshly cooked corn. I looked at the yellow corn cobs in the pot, remembering that Micah hadn't and Appo's had anything delicious to eat since morning. End quote. "Please sell me a few ears of corn." End quote. The vendor took a few hot ears of corn, carefully wrapped them and handed them to me. I took the money out of my pocket to count, still worried because I didn't and Appo's have much left. I happily paid and received the bag of corn. End quote. "Thank you." End quote. I held the bag of corn and headed back to the hospital. My steps quickened, hoping Micah had some food to fill her stomach, and that when she woke up, could see that I was still by her side. The hospital corridor lights were still on, and the sound of the nurse and Appo's cart echoed in the quiet space. I opened the door to the ward and gently stepped inside, beside Huyen and Micah, the two of them. I just saw Uncle De enter the hospital room, and Micah, sitting beside the bed, immediately looked up. Her eyes brighter, she quickly sat upright. De gently smiled and raised a bag of corn in his hand. End quote. "Uncle bought corn for Micah." End quote. He placed the warm bag of corn on the small table next to the bed. Then De pulled a chair closer to Huyen and sat down slowly. The hospital room remained quiet, only the faint sound of machines and the footsteps of the nurse outside the corridor. De looked at Huyen lying still, her face still pale after the days of severe illness. He reached out and took her hand, her thin cold hand resting in his. He sat silently like that, saying nothing, only gently holding Huyen and Appo's hand. Micah looked at Uncle De and then at her mother. In her heart, she only wished that her mother would open her eyes soon and call her name again like every day. De sat beside the hospital bed for a while and noticed Huyen and Appo's lips were slightly dry. He stood up and poured a glass of warm water from the water jug on the table. End quote. "Huyen, drink a little water, okay?" End quote. He took a small spoon, scooped a little warm water and slowly brought it to her mouth. One spoonful at a time, De did it very gently, afraid she might feel uncomfortable. Even though Huyen was still unconscious, he remained patient in caring for her, wiping away the water droplets lingering at the corner of her lips. Micah sat quietly beside, watching Uncle De care for Mom. The little girl held a few ears of corn in her pocket, her eyes red and teary, but seeing that Uncle was still by Mom and Appo's side, she felt more at ease. After Huyen finished drinking, De placed the glass on the table. He then took her thin hand, gently massaging each finger with both hands to help warm her hand. While massaging her hand, he looked at Huyen and Appo's face with her eyes closed, wishing she would wake up soon. De looked at Huyen still lying peacefully on the hospital bed. He gently picked up the corn bag, bent down and carried Micah out of the room. End quote. "Uncle, take Micah to eat some corn so Mom can rest for a while." End quote. Micah wrapped her arms around Uncle De and Appo's neck, obediently leaning on his shoulder. De carried the warm corn bag and walked down the hospital corridor. The white lights from the ceiling shone down on the two of them, and the sound of footsteps echoed softly in the quiet space. Reaching the last bench in the corridor, De gently placed Micah on the seat. He sat beside her, opening the still warm corn. De peeled off the green husk layer, revealing the hot corn cob. End quote. "Micah, eat it and Appo's still hot." End quote. He handed her a corn cob. Micah took it with both hands, blew on it gently, then took small bites. De peeled another cob for himself. The two of them sat side by side on the hospital bench, eating and looking towards Huyen and Appo's room door. After eating a few bites, Micah and Appo's eyes softened. She had been overly worried about her mother all day, and now just having Uncle De beside her and a hot corn cob made her heart feel lighter. De sat down on a step, with Micah sitting beside him. The child was still holding an ear of corn in his hand, slowly eating small bites. The warm smell of corn was still fragrant, but Micah and Appo's face no longer looked as cheerful as usual. Occasionally, he looked up towards his mother and Appo's hospital room. De sat quietly beside him. He didn't and Appo's eat, only holding the ear of corn in his hand while gazing out at the front yard of the hospital. His eyes were distant, and his face showed signs of fatigue after many days of running back and forth to take care of Huyen. In his mind, he kept thinking about Huyen lying motionless on the hospital bed. About the time she tried to endure her illness while still worrying about Micah. He sighed softly, his calloused hands gently squeezing the ear of corn. Micah saw that Uncle De looked sad, so he paused eating for a moment and gently asked, "Uncle De, will my mom get better?" De turned to look at Micah, trying to smile softly. "Mom will get better. I believe so." Then he gently patted Micah and Appo's head. The two of them sat again by the hospital stairs, one quietly eating corn, the other silently gazing into the distance. De sat for a while on the stairs before standing up. He lightly brushed off the remaining corn husks on his hand, then took Micah and Appo's small hand, "Let an Appo's go, Micah. We and Appo's going to see Mom." Micah nodded, holding her Uncle De and Appo's hand tightly. The uncle and niece slowly walked down the corridor back to the hospital room. As they entered, De saw Huyen still lying quietly on the bed. He pulled a chair to sit beside her, while Micah sat close to her mother. After a while, the doctor and nurse entered the room. The doctor checked Huyen and Appo's condition and prepared the injection. De stepped aside, attentively watching each of the doctor and Appo's actions. After giving Huyen the injection, the doctor packed up the equipment and turned to speak to De. "Go to the reception to get the prescription, then go outside to buy the medicine for the patient. It needs to be used soon." "Yes, I will go right away." He looked at Huyen one more time, gently holding her hand, then turned to tell Micah, "Micah, sit here and watch over Mom." Micah nodded, hugging her mother and Appo's hand. De hurriedly went to the doctor and Appo's duty room, feeling anxious inside. Upon entering the duty room, De politely greeted the doctor and asked about Huyen and Appo's condition. "Doctor, is her illness very serious?" The doctor looked at the medical record, explained the situation to De slowly, and advised him to buy medicine and monitor her condition further. De listened very attentively, trying to remember every word the doctor said. Then the doctor handed him a prescription. "Please take this prescription to the hospital pharmacy to buy the medicine. It needs to be taken soon." "Yes, I understand." De took the prescription, bowed his head to thank the doctor, and quickly returned to the hospital room. When he arrived, he pulled a chair and sat down beside Huyen and Appo's bed. Micah was still sitting beside her mother, and upon seeing De return, she looked up softly. De held the prescription in his hand, carefully opening it to review each type of medication prescribed by the doctor. The words on the paper made him silent for a long time. He put his hand into his shirt pocket, took out the remaining money. The crumpled bills and a few coins were placed on his palm, then slowly counted again. Once. Then another time. The amount of money was not much anymore. De looked at the small amount of money in his hand, then glanced at Huyen lying on the hospital bed. His face was briefly sad, but he still tried to stay calm. He gently folded the prescription back, put the money into his pocket. No matter how difficult it was, he still had to buy medicine for Huyen, because at this moment the thing he cared about most was whether she could recover. De puts the prescription into his shirt pocket, then turns back to the hospital bed. He looks at Huyen lying peacefully, then glances at Micah sitting beside her mother. De gently says, and quote, "Micah, stay here and watch over Mom. I just went to buy medicine and will be back soon." End quote. Micah nods, still holding her mother and Appo's hand. De softly pats Micah and Appo's head, then stands up. He steps out of the hospital room and walks quickly toward the pharmacy. The long, quiet corridor echoes with his footsteps in the silent space. In De and Appo's hand, he still tightly holds the prescription, hoping that these medicines will help Huyen get better. As he passes down the corridor, he sees the hospital pharmacy sign ahead. De pauses briefly, touches his shirt pocket where his small amount of money is, then takes a deep breath and continues walking. No matter how much money he has or how difficult things are, he must buy enough medicine for Huyen, because inside that room, there is still a mother and a child waiting for him to return. While De was buying medicine, the hospital room remained quiet. Micah sat beside the bed, her eyes always looking towards her mother. After a while, the doctor and nurse entered to check. Seeing that the fluid had run out, the doctor gently prepared the equipment and removed the needle from Huyen and Appo's hand. Micah stood nearby, anxiously watching each of the doctor and Appo's actions. When the doctor left, she let out a soft sigh of relief. The little girl approached the bed, gently stroking her mother and Appo's hair with her tiny hand. End quote. "Mom, please wake up soon." End quote. Micah and Appo's voice was small, as if afraid to wake her mother. She sat beside her for a while, then quietly climbed onto the bed, lying close to Huyen. Micah wrapped her arms around her mother, pressing her small face against her, just like the days at home. Although the hospital bed was not wide, she still tried to stay very close to feel the familiar warmth. Micah and Appo's small hand still held her mother and Appo's hand tightly. She closed her eyes and lay still beside Huyen, only hoping that when she opened her eyes, she would see her mother looking at her and calling her name. De entered the hospital pharmacy, handed the prescription to the pharmacist. He waited anxiously, worried because he didn't and Appo's have much money left. The pharmacist carefully took all the medications prescribed, checked each one, and placed them into a small bag. De took the little money from his shirt pocket to pay. After receiving the bag of medicine, he carefully checked it again, afraid of missing anything. De tightly held the bag of medicine in his hand and hurried back to the hospital. He walked quickly down the hospital corridor, his eyes constantly looking ahead. In his mind, he was only thinking about Huyen and Micah waiting for him. De carries the medicine bag in his hand, walking quickly towards the doctor and Appo's on-call room. Upon arrival, he places the bag on the table, then takes out each type of medicine and hands them to the doctor for verification according to the prescription. The doctor carefully examines each box of medicine, cross-referencing with the prescription, then nods. End quote. "Yes, everything is complete. Take these to the patient's room and use them exactly as instructed." End quote. De breathes a sigh of relief. End quote. "Yes, thank you, doctor." End quote. He carefully packs all the medicines back into the bag, carries it in his hand and heads back to the patient's room. Along the corridor, De walks faster. He only hopes to return soon to Huyen and Micah. When he reaches the door, he gently pushes it open and steps inside, placing the medicine bag on the bedside table. I opened the small cabinet beside the bed, took out Huyen and Appo's clean clothes that had been prepared earlier. I handed the clothes to the nurse. End quote. "Please help me change her clothes." End quote. The nurse received the clothes and nodded gently. I looked at Huyen for a moment, then proactively stepped out of the room and closed the door, so the nurse could take care of her. I walked down the hospital corridor to the familiar long chair and sat down. I leaned back in the chair, clasped my hands together, and looked sadly toward the hospital room door. After many days of rushing around to take care of Huyen, I finally had a short moment to sit still. But inside I still couldn't and oppose. Find peace. I only hoped the door would open soon so I could know that she had been taken care of and everything was okay. After a while, the nurse opened the hospital room door. She stepped out, handing Huyen and Appo's dirty clothes to Da. Here are her clothes, sir. Da took them, nodded in thanks and set the clothes aside. He then entered the hospital room. At this moment the nurse was preparing the 4 drip again. She gently checked Huyen and Appo's arm, reinserted the 4 line, and adjusted the drip rate. Da stood beside her, waiting for her to finish, then pulled a chair closer to the bed. Huyen lay quietly on the bed, her face still pale. Micah was lying close to her mother, her small hands still holding her mother and having fallen asleep after a long tiring day. Da sat down beside the 2 of them. He placed the dirty clothes aside and looked at the 4 drip, which was dripping slowly. One hand gently rested on the bed rail, while the other held Huyen and Appo's hand. Da said nothing. He simply sat there quietly beside Huyen and Micah, continuing to wait. Da sat beside the bed, gently touching Huyen and Appo's forehead and then lowering his hand to Micah and Appo's forehead. Huyen and Appo's forehead was still cold and pale, but when his hand touched Micah and Appo's forehead, Da was startled. The girl and Appo's forehead was hot. Micah. He quickly placed his hand on her forehead again to check. Micah was still lying, hugging her mother, her cheeks flushed, and her breathing seemed tired. Da immediately stood up. He quickly left the hospital room and headed straight to the nurse and Appo's station. Doctor. Da called out as soon as he reached the door. Please come check on little Micah. She and Appo's running a fever, her forehead is hot. The doctor immediately stood up, took the examination tools, and quickly returned to the hospital room with Da. Da walked closely beside the doctor, looking worried. At this moment, he only hoped the doctor would check Micah in time and help her reduce the fever. The doctor approached the bed, gently checked Micah and took her temperature. Seeing that she had a fever, the doctor applied a fever-reducing patch on Micah and Appo's forehead. Then the doctor handed Da a packet of medicine and said, Mix this medicine with a little water and give it to her. Monitor her temperature, and if the fever doesn't end Appo's go down, inform us immediately. Da received the medicine and carefully stored it in his hand. Yes, I understand. Thank you, doctor. The doctor left the room. Da returned to the bedside, looking at Micah lying with her mother, her face flushed from the fever. He gently stroked her hair and sat down beside her. In the hospital room, Huyen was still lying still, with the drip slowly delivering fluids. On one side was her mother, seriously ill, and on the other side was Micah, running a fever, which made Da even more worried. I took a glass of warm water and sat down beside Micah. Micah, which water do you want to drink? Be good. I gently handed the glass to the child. Micah obediently sipped each mouthful. Then I took a cloth to gently wipe the corner of her mouth. After drinking water, I helped Micah lie down next to Huyen. Micah, stay here quietly with Mom. I will go buy some porridge for you to eat and will be back soon. Micah nodded softly and snuggled close to her mother. I looked at the mother and daughter for a moment longer, then stood up, left the hospital room and went to buy porridge. To return to the hospital room with a hot bowl of porridge in his hand. He gently placed the bowl on the table beside the bed and looked at Micah. Seeing that she was feverish, Da bent down to carefully lift Micah into his arms and carried her to the small bed nearby. But the pain and fever made Micah uncomfortable, and as soon as she was placed on the bed, she started crying. "Be good, my uncle is here." End quote. De quickly sat down beside her, gently stroking her hair and wiping away her tears. He looked at the fever patch still stuck on Micah and Apo's forehead, feeling even more heartbroken. Micah cried and called out, end quote, "Uncle De, I and Apos am tired." End quote. De took her small hand and gently comforted her, end quote, "I know, be good. Eat a little porridge and rest, I will stay here with you." End quote. I pulled the chair closer to Micah and Apo's bed. I opened the warm bowl of porridge, gently stirred it with a spoon and took a small spoonful. I carefully blew on the porridge to cool it down, then brought it to Micah and Apo's mouth. End quote. "Micah, eat a little, only then will you have the strength." End quote. Micah was still tired, her eyes red from the fever. The girl slightly opened her mouth and ate each small spoonful. I patiently fed her each spoon, blowing on the porridge to make it just warm enough before giving it to her. Sometimes Micah was too tired to eat and I gently comforted her. End quote. "Be good, just one more spoon." End quote. Micah listened and tried to eat more. While feeding her, I also gently stroked her hot hair. The bowl of porridge gradually emptied, and I looked at Micah, seeing that she had stopped crying, which eased my heart a little. After finishing the porridge, De placed the bowl on the table and took out the fever medicine that the doctor had given. He carefully dissolved the medicine in a little water, stirred well, and then handed it to Micah. End quote, "Micah, take your medicine. After you finish, lie down and rest to feel better." End quote. Micah obediently drank all the medicine. De wiped the corner of her mouth gently with a cloth, then picked up Micah and carefully laid her inside the bed, close to Huyen. He adjusted the pillow to make the baby comfortable. Micah was still tired but no longer crying, only softly snuggling into her mother. De sat down beside the bed, gently touched Micah and Apo's forehead and then looked at Huyen. De sat beside the hospital bed for a long time, then exhausted, he rested his head on the bed and took a quick nap. But after a short while, De suddenly woke up startled by Huyen and Apo's labored breathing. He quickly sat up straight. Huyen was in the throes of dying, her breath becoming rapid and difficult. De panicked, gently shook her shoulder. End quote, "Huyen! Huyen!" End quote. He called several times but Huyen showed no response. De immediately stood up, ran out of the ward. He hurried to the nurse and Apo's station, running and shouting loudly, end quote, "Doctor! Doctor! Come help her! Huyen is struggling to breathe, she won and Apo's. Wake up no matter how much I call." End quote. The doctor, hearing the call, quickly stood up, grabbed the emergency equipment and ran back to the ward with De. The doctor immediately began emergency treatment for Huyen. She checked her condition, performed chest compressions, and simultaneously squeezed the oxygen tank to assist with breathing. De stood beside her, his face pale with worry, his hands clenched tightly together. Micah also woke up, frightened, looking towards her mother. After a while of emergency care, Huyen and Apo's breathing gradually stabilized. The doctor quickly put an oxygen mask on her and checked her vital signs. The doctor turned to De and said, end quote, "She just had a very severe attack. You must monitor her closely, and if she has difficulty breathing again or shows any abnormal signs, call us immediately." End quote. De nodded repeatedly. End quote. "Yes, I understand." End quote. The doctor packed up his equipment and left the room. The room became quiet again. De approached Huyen and Apo's bed while Micah was sitting close to her mother. The girl looked at her mother and Apo's face, which was wearing an oxygen mask, and then burst into tears streaming down her cheeks. End quote. "Mom." End quote. Micah held her mother and Apo's hand, crying as she pressed her face against Huyen and Apo's arm. De sat down beside her, gently stroking Micah and Apo's head. End quote. Micah, Don and Apo's cry. Mom is being treated by the doctor. The doctor is here with both of you, end quote. But Da and Apo's own eyes were also red. He looked at Huyen lying still, hearing the steady sound of the oxygen, then quietly took her hand, not daring to take another step away. Seeing Huyen lying peacefully, breathing more steadily thanks to the oxygen tank, and Micah sleeping soundly beside her mother, Da gently stood up. He took the piece of bread he had bought earlier, quietly opened the door to the room, and stepped out into the corridor. Da looked for the familiar long chair, sat down alone. He peeled off the outer paper, held the bread in his hand and slowly ate each bite. The hospital corridor was quieter. As he ate, he looked toward the door of the hospital room. The bread was simple, but after a long day of running back and forth, it was almost the first proper meal he could sit down and enjoy. Da lowered his head, silently chewing each piece. His mind kept thinking about Huyen and Micah. After eating half, he stopped, looked at the clock, then looked back toward the hospital room. As soon as he heard a call, he would immediately stand up and run in. Da sat alone in the corridor, finishing the bread in silence. After finishing his meal, Da returned to the hospital room. Seeing Huyen still sleeping peacefully, her breath steady through the oxygen mask, he pulled up a chair and sat close to the bed. Da looked at Huyen and Apo's thin hands and noticed her nails had grown long. He took out a small nail clipper from his pocket. Gently, he held each of Huyen and Apo's fingers, carefully clipping each nail. His movements were slow and gentle, afraid of waking her or disrupting the four-line. After finishing one hand, Da gathered the small nail clippings and then moved on to the other hand. Micah, lying beside her, was still sleeping soundly. In the quiet hospital room, Da quietly took care of Huyen bit by bit, as if just making her cleaner and more comfortable would bring him peace of mind. Da leaned against the bed, sitting quietly beside Huyen. Outside the window, the sky was gradually darkening, and the last rays of sunset had completely disappeared. Da hurriedly left the hospital room, went to a nearby eatery to buy a hot bowl of porridge for Micah. After purchasing it, he carefully held the bowl in his hands and quickly returned. As he reached the door of the room, Da saw the doctor by Huyen and Apo's bed, preparing to administer her medication. He immediately set the bowl of porridge down on the table, stepped aside, and waited for the doctor to care for Huyen. Micah was now awake, sitting beside the bed, looking at her mother, her face still tired from the fever. Da approached gently and patted the child and Apo's head. End quote. The doctor bought you some porridge. After Mom gets her injection you can eat. End quote. Micah nodded softly, her eyes still fixed on her mother. Da carried Micah to the adjacent bed, then sat down on a chair. He took out a bowl of porridge, scooping small spoonfuls, blowing on them to cool, and gently feeding Micah. End quote. Eat nicely, finish the bowl, then we can go outside to sit for a bit. End quote. Micah obediently ate each spoonful. After finishing, Da wiped the child and Apo's mouth and then lifted Micah up. He also held a piece of bread and took the grandparents and grandson outside to the corridor. Da sat Micah down on a chair near the window, allowing the child to play in the fresh air. He instructed, end quote, Micah, sit here and play nicely, don't run away anywhere. End quote. Micah nodded softly, swinging his small legs. Da sat on the chair beside him, quietly eating the dry bread without any side dish. After a long day of running back and forth caring for Huyen and Micah, he was exhausted. The hallway light cast a glow on Da's tired face. He ate while occasionally glancing at Micah, then looking toward the hospital room door where Huyen was still lying. Micah sat playing for a while and then got tired, so I stood up and picked her up. End quote. Come on, let an Apo's go wash your face, hands and feet, then we and Apo's I'll go back to Mom. End quote. I carried Micah to the bathroom. I gently washed her hands, feet, and then wiped her face with a wet cloth. Micah obediently stood still, her eyes still showing signs of fatigue after the fever. After washing, I dried her with a towel and carried Micah back to the hospital room. I stepped quietly into the room and gently placed Micah on the bed, close to her mother. As soon as Micah lay down, she snuggled into Huyen, her small hand resting on her mother and Appo's arm. I felt Micah and Appo's forehead and then looked at Huyen, who was lying there, breathing oxygen. It is late at night. In the hospital room, only the dim light and the faint sound of machines remain. De sits leaning against the side of the bed, his eyes heavy with fatigue but still awake to watch over the mother and her child. Huyen remains still, not yet awake, her breathing steady through the oxygen mask. Micah lies close to her mother, her face still flushed from fever. The girl stirs gently and then nestles back into Huyen. De reaches out to pull the blanket over Micah, then looks at Huyen. He sighs quietly and sits there in the late night. Outside the corridor, the hospital gradually falls into silence. Another long night passes and De stays by Huyen and Micah's side, waiting for the mother to wake up soon. He pulls a chair to sit beside the bed, continuing to silently watch over the mother and her child through the night. If everyone loves Huyen and Micah and Appo's mother and child, please subscribe to the channel, turn on the notifications, and leave a word of encouragement for the two of them to see the next developments. Every follow and every loving comment from everyone will be a source of comfort and strength to help Huyen get through difficult times. Thank you all very much.